All right, okay, bear with me. This will be a little long-winded. I'm going to reference my cheat sheet here. The argument is that the price of food would increase substantially if workers were afforded proper labor rights, and it would seem that the provincial government clearly believes this would leave less money for the purchase of consumer products, which would substantially impact our economy negatively. Is there any truth to that, any substance to that? Because I look at other provinces in Canada where workers are afforded the rights, and well, it's not exactly doomsday, is it?
Well, and food isn't the only consumable product we buy. We buy all sorts of other things as members of society that are created by workers who are protected by minimum wage standards and occupational health and safety legislation. I'd also like to point out that economic arguments are not a valid basis for the government maintaining these exclusions. And we have all sorts of case law under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms saying governments can't infringe on people's rights and freedoms simply because it's more economically advantageous to do so.
That's right. Is that the commonality? Like, I mean, when you're talking about this issue, I mean, obviously people are surprised to hear it. We talked a bit about people that are apathetic, but do people lean on that pretty quickly? That they think, well, the price of food is going to increase and it's going to affect my lifestyle.
The people that I've talked to, that never comes across. What comes across is that this isn't fair, and in 2014, how is this still happening? That's all I hear. I don't hear anything about the food going up or anything. People I talk to don't seem to be concerned about that, only because they're not mentioning it.
To be fair, the majority of farm workers, they're not all greedy bad guys, are they?
No.
Farm workers? No.
Farmers, pardon me. Farm owners.
No.
Farm owners, pardon me.
I think that as a member of the Farm Safety Advisory Council, I was the lone labor advocate, but everyone else were farmer or farm organization representatives. And there are a number of farmers that are doing a great job, and I think they need to be recognized for it. There's a number of them that have voluntary WCB on their farms, and they're doing great work with the farm workers and the migrant farm workers they have. But I think there are those slim minority that don't. And I think that's the argument is a lot of industry use that we should be self-policing. We should allow the industry to police themselves. And the problem with that is that if that's the way it currently is, that's not what's happening, because there is still that small 2 to 3% of those farms out there that are willfully disregarding even common sense to say that we're just going to do it this way anyway, and they're still continuing to do that even though everyone knows it's happening. And the industry isn't policing themselves.
Talk a bit about the migrant farm workers.
Yeah.
Is there a different set of standards that are federalized for migrant farm workers?
No, in Alberta we have somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 migrant farm workers, we think, because those numbers aren't advertised. The problem is they're under the same exclusions that every Canadian farm worker would have. The problem is that it's even more precarious for them, because not only do they not have the right to refuse unsafe work or to bring up any work issues and whatnot, is that if they complain, they can also be sent home. There's no protections at all, and we deal with a number of horror stories where farms are self-recruiting. They go and pick all the males out of a certain community and say that if one of you complain, I'm sending all of you home. So now not only does it hurt that one worker, it hurts the entire community back in that South American country, because the peer pressure is don't complain, because it's just going to hurt everyone. So collectively, let's take care of everyone and let's just put up with the garbage that we have.
So it's an issue that really has a far-reaching social impact.
Completely.
It does.
It sounds like. Was that part of the study? The migrant workers?
We focus mostly on the law, but there's a lot of great research out there that's been done by other people. Like I'll mention Bob Barnettson at the University of Alberta, and people have really gotten into the social and historical context of farm workers. And I think if any kind of legal challenge was going to be brought forward, that would be a really important part of the picture, is to look at things that way.
Let me talk about the lack of unions, which, it is what it is. It's disgusting, but it is, what it is. Economically speaking, I mean, what do we think the resulting effects would really be if all farm workers in Alberta collectively walked off the job? It's a tough one.
Well, You know, if all farm workers walked off the job, I think there would be some concerns about the food supply and whatnot. But the one thing is we don't have a country of origin label on the carrots that we get. We don't have a province of origin label in these, so we don't know where the carrots are that we've bought. We don't know where the apples are. We're not growing apples in Alberta in most cases. But I think that that is a concern if workers stood up for themselves. Is that, you know, where would we get the food? Where would we get the product? But the problem is they don't have that right, and if they try to stand up for themselves, they can be legally fired for it. And they don't have the right to refuse any sort of unsafe work. And with occupational health and safety, you are legally protected against firing or discipline if you refuse. Without it, see ya.
Yep.
Is it part of the fear mongering, do you think? The fact that the food supply, you know, potentially could be affected if we allow these farm workers to unionize?
I haven't heard that argument.
Yeah.
I haven't heard it put that way. I think it's just, it's the main talking point is it's going to hurt small family farms.
Yeah.
And that's the other side of the equation. That's the rhetoric they continue to go with.
Children in Alberta on farms, zero protection.
Yeah, so most children have protections under employment safety or employment standards legislation, and the problem is that because farm and ranch workers are excluded from employment standards legislation, that means that children who are working on farms just don't have those protections.
That's incredible. Is it not? And we do see a lot of children working on farms. Is that what we're finding? Philippa?
This is what I hear.
Is that right?
I hear it's, I wouldn't say rampant, obviously, but there, down south I hear there's quite a few of them. Like families with lots of children, and they're out working in the fields, whether it's potatoes, beets, or pumpkins.
Well, it's common sense things too. It's things like, you know, children being able to ride in the back of a pickup truck at speed without anybody, you know, policing that. Where do we lose the common sense aspect? Well, I guess that's where I'm shaking my head.
And I think some of the things is that I went to high school in High River, and 2 days before our grad, one of the people I went to school with, his sister was killed in a rollover of a tractor. And she was 15 or 16 at the time. She was driving the tractor by herself, and unfortunately it got tipped on a hill, and she got thrown out, and it rolled over her. The problem is that there's no regulations on it. It's not that we're talking about child labor on farms because they're hiring a bunch of children. It's family members working on the farms, and there's no rule that says an 8-year-old can't operate a tractor. You know, how many kids say that they drove the farm truck? It's not on a road, so it's okay. But we have rules in place to protect people. And I've heard stories of farmers bragging that they're sitting on the hood of their combine because it's GPS driven outside as it's driving down and doing the work, washing the windows, and how nice it is that I can just lay here and do nothing while the machine operates itself. There's no engineering controls to even prevent that.
My students, I thought, made a good argument about this, which is that, you know, you can think of all sorts of other family-run businesses like restaurants. We would be horrified if we thought that young children were operating some of the dangerous equipment in restaurants, and we should be equally horrified at the situation of children working on family farms.
You know, to be fair, I mean, I don't know if that it is common knowledge, but I mean, there's thousands of severe injuries that occur on Alberta farms a year. On average, 20 deaths. You'd hope that would be enough for people to really give their head a bit of a shake. Clearly the message is getting missed.
You'd hope so, but the problem is that under occupational health and safety, those numbers are tracked. So those are the numbers that are recorded that we know in any other industry. In the farming industry, those are assumed numbers, because not only are those numbers someone getting killed riding a quad that happens to be on a farm, because it's lumped in, it happened to be on a farm, it's an agricultural death, but there's no tracking system to how many injuries there are, how many fatalities there are, because under OH&S and WCB, there's a mandatory, you go to the doctor, it's work-related, fill out this form. In the farming industry, you don't have that. So any number that we get is an assumption, because we don't know and it's not tracked.
It could be a lot worse than it is.
Absolutely.
So where's the middle ground? I mean, is there any semblance of a solution on the horizon? Working with farm owners, finding a common ground with farm workers, giving them the rights? Is there, I mean, let's be frank. Without what? You know, what do we need? What can people do to help see this change?
I mean, I would love to see people calling their MLAs and saying that we need these protections. I think a worker is a worker regardless of where they work, and I don't think they should be discriminated against because they happen to work on a farm versus not in a restaurant. I think that middle ground, we're not looking for anything more than anybody else has.
That's right. Yeah,
we're looking for what everyone else has. And just to be able to say, hey, if something's unsafe, I can say I want to refuse.
Human
it.
rights, bottom line.
Absolutely.
Guys, I'm out of time. Thanks very much for being here. Really appreciate it. Folks, thanks again for joining us tonight. As always, an informative discussion. And, frankly, it's our last show this season. It's been a great season 4. Feel free to get at us on the off season. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. If you have a show topic you want us to discuss, don't be a stranger and drop us a line. We'll see you next season. Take care.